Welcome to the Golden Age of Greece. All right, we're going to take a look at some important individuals as well as events from that era. I want you to go ahead and get your notebook together, a sheet of paper for your notes, and title this The Golden Age of Greece. Now, the Greeks were going up against the greatest empire of the day. That is the Persian Empire. Now, the Persians had strength, they had technology, they were the largest empire of the day, most advanced, but the one thing they did not have was the Greek phalanx, a fighting formation that's going to give the Greeks a huge advantage, as you will see in the upcoming video. All right, it starts off at the Battle of Marathon, and I want you to see what happened here.
In 490 BC, 10 years before the Spartans' last stand at Thermopylae, the Persian king Darius sends a force of 30,000 across the Aegean Sea to annihilate Athens.
The reason for the invasion is that King Darius is upset. Years earlier, the Athenians had helped a group of Greek rebels burn a Persian city to the ground. This was known as the Ionian Revolt. Now it's payback time, and it will result in one of the most famous battles in Greek history, the Battle of Marathon.
About 26 miles east of Athens, on the plain of Marathon, a Greek army of about 8,000 marches toward the coast to meet the invaders.
The Greeks see the fleet offshore transporting troops to attack Athens, and what they do is they deploy on the beach, threatening the Persians with a battle, and the Persians take the bait.
30,000 Persians pour off their ships and charge the Greeks. The Greeks create a defensive line in a narrow valley between two mountains. The massive Persian force smashes into the Athenians. The Greeks stand strong, but soon the center of their defensive line begins to collapse. The Persians push forward, but this is a trap. While the center of the Greek line retreats, the flanks remain strong. As the Persians press further into the valley, the Greek army envelops them.
The Greeks suckered the Persians in, and now they have them surrounded on three sides. The Persians can't maneuver, and it's a narrow combat box. The battle becomes an absolute slaughter.
The Greeks send a runner to Athens to report the great victory. The messenger runs a distance of about 26 miles.
And that's why today, the marathon race is 26 miles. What they don't tell you is the runner who ran into the square of Athens yelled, "Nike," meaning victory, dropped dead from exhaustion.
The Athenians build the original Parthenon to commemorate the famous victory at Marathon over the Persians. The building and the battle send shockwaves through the Persian Empire.
To be sure, a great empire like Persia and a great king cannot allow an insult directly to his national prestige. And that's what the pinprick at Marathon did. I mean, it basically was said to everyone who looked, well, look at this little power stood up to this great giant.
Persia's first attempt at revenge against Athens has failed miserably. Darius plans another attack, but dies before the invasion can be realized.
Son of Darius, Xerxes, vowed to avenge his father's loss. 10 years later, in 480 BC, he would bring to the Greek shores the largest army that the Greeks had ever seen. And this began at the Battle of Thermopylae. Now, this narrow pass was the key right here. This narrow pass was the key to holding this huge army and reducing the Persian advantage. And the group that took the lead here were the 300 Spartans. They weren't alone, but they were the main warriors in this battle.
Xerxes sends in the hammer and fist of the Persian army, the silent and masked heavy infantry called the Immortals.
Xerxes decided to send in the A-Team, the Immortals. He believed that once the Immortals were put into action, that would end the resistance immediately.
Here come 10,000 men, assembled in a rectangle, in essence. Boom, 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 right to you in silence. No matter what happens, they come right at you.
The Persian light infantry are not designed for this kind of battle. They're built for speed, to attack disorganized tribal armies on the open plains of Asia.
Stuck in the narrow pass, the Persians are unable to maneuver. They also cannot utilize their cavalry. The steepness of Mount Koleodromos on one side and the Aegean Sea on the other prevent a Persian cavalry flanking maneuver.
If you look at the two Greek battles that we study most often, which is Marathon and Thermopylae, what you'll see is the brilliance of Greek commanders in selecting terrain where the Persians could not bring their cavalry to bear.
On this first day of battle, Xerxes has been shocked and embarrassed by Themistocles and the Athenian navy, and has lost nearly 10,000 infantrymen to Leonidas and the Spartans.
After the first day's battle at Thermopylae and Artemisium, the Persians have been very roughly handled by the Greeks. They are back in their camp that evening, licking their wounds.
And that was the end of the Persian scare. The Persian army was forced to leave Greece, and that gave birth to something that we later called the Delian League, where the Greeks are going to unite as one.
Fired up with Pan-Hellenic pride, the Athenians spearheaded an alliance to take vengeance on the Persians. This alliance was called the Delian League. Islands and city-states across the Aegean built ships, armed crews, and sent lavish donations to the League's treasury on the island of Delos. Always afraid of a slave revolt at home, Sparta declined to participate. Driving the Persians off was one thing, picking a fight with them was quite another. Yet the Spartans need not have feared. The superior triremes of the Greeks allowed them to attack with impunity. They sunk Persian ships and raided Persian towns. Worse yet, at least in the eyes of the Persians, the Greeks staged revolutions in the cities they conquered, killing off rich aristocrats and establishing democracies. Persian soldiers would arrive to reinforce a town, only to find the gates barred to them, while the Greeks had sailed on to attack somewhere else. The Delian League grew rich off this plunder. Working together, they would teach the Persians never to mess with Greece again. Yet this giddy Pan-Hellenism did not last forever. For starters, Pericles decided to hold the dissolving Delian League together by force. Though the Persians posed no further threat, League members were still expected to pay their dues. The League members were still paying for protection, just now it was not the protection of a united League against a common enemy, but rather the sort of protection one pays the mafia for, just on a grander scale. Pericles raided the treasury at Delos and brought it home to Athens. Now he had something to work with. Flush with cash from the treasury, Pericles rebuilt all the temples of Athens. To return beauty and grandeur to the Acropolis, he commissioned the Parthenon, with its huge golden statue of Athena. He also built a new meeting hall for the General Assembly, as well as several other public buildings. Pericles' enrichment of the Athenian state was not limited to building. He invited sculptors from around the empire to beautify the city. Meanwhile, he patronized a growing circle of philosophers, poets, playwrights, and artists, giving rise to the glorious culture that came to be identified with all of Greece.
Now, the Delian League, again, dominated by Athens, is going to allow the Athenians to build an empire of their own. And as they began to dominate, one leader emerged from the Athenian Empire, and his name was Pericles. Pericles wanted to make Athens the envy of the world, the most beautiful city on the face of the earth, and he was going to have to rebuild it from the ground up. This began what we now know as the Golden Age of Greece. Now here are three goals that Pericles had in mind to make Athens the envy of the rest of the earth. One, he was going to strengthen the democracy. Two, he was going to build the empire. And three, he was going to glorify Athens, that is, with a rebuilding program. Now all of this was going to be done using Delian League monies. Now, Pericles was not the first reformer. He was actually he was the last in a long line of democratic reformers. First, there had been Draco, who came up with the legal code, which basically put rich and poor on the same level in the eyes of the law. Then there was Solon, who outlawed debt slavery. And then he also rewrote Draco's code. Then there was Cleisthenes, who increased the power of the assembly. This is going to be hugely important. And then last, but not least, is Pericles, who's going to expand citizenship. And he's going to begin to pay people to participate in the democratic process. All right, answer these few questions. You may need to pause the video to answer them on that separate sheet of paper. Olympics began where? In Olympia, of course.
This is Olympia in southern Greece. Here, once every 4 years, men from across the Greek world would gather to compete in a vast contest of athletic skill. This was the ancestor of the modern Olympic Games. The competitions had been founded in 776 BC, 2 centuries before Cleisthenes had even been born. Then they had been an exclusive competition for the wealthiest of the Greeks. But by Cleisthenes' time, the games had evolved to allow anyone to take part. A nobleman could now race against a potter, a king against a fishmonger. The competitions had their roots in the skills displayed by the mythical heroes. Chariot racing, running, wrestling, boxing. But here there was no real prize, just a wreath of olives and fame throughout Greece. Greeks would travel hundreds of miles to attend the Olympics. And during the festival, the land surrounding the stadiums would be covered with encampments. But for the Greek man, whatever his origin or class, to win here would be the highlight of his life.
You had, briefly, a moment of glory, of extreme fame, which was what the competitive culture of the Greeks valued so highly.
Here the Greeks had perhaps found a civilized way to satisfy the heroic ideal.
Now this brought democratic ideas into the sporting world. Now, it doesn't seem like this is a big advancement, but it did. What it did is it prevented war between the various city-states, and they were able to solve problems diplomatically. And now the games were discontinued after the fall of Greece, but in 1896 they were restarted, and we still celebrate them now every 4 years since 1896. Now, Phidias. Phidias is going to be the sculptor who is going to create what we now know as the Parthenon. It housed a 30-foot statue of the goddess Athena. Now, reason it's important today is not necessarily for what it held, but for how it held it. The columns. Okay, these columns are going to be extremely important. This is a building style, an architectural style that is going to make its way all the way through the ancient times, the modern times, up until today. We still use this. To take a look at this picture here of the capital. Now, notice the Greek influence there. Now, the dome is actually a Roman influence, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But together, both of them, we call this the Greco-Roman heritage. Okay, so we still use these ideas today. Go to science. Let's look at science. Greek astronomy is going to play a huge influence on the development of sciences, not only in Europe, but in other parts of the world as well. Greek mathematicians, we still use some of their ideas. Pythagoras, I'm sure you are familiar with him, and Euclid. Euclid actually wrote the book that geometry, all the rules of geometry are based on today. All right, and we have leaders of physics, engineering. Democritus is actually a really interesting individual. He, with his naked eye, was able to figure out that the smallest forms of life are atoms. How was he able to figure this out? Not sure, but he was able to figure this out using logic, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, they also came up with theater, looking at two different types of dramas. The Greek dramas worked like this. You had a tragedy or you had a comedy. It was one or the other. Comedies usually poked fun at society, and then on the other side, tragedy took serious themes like love, revenge, and they put it into a story. Probably one of the most famous ones, Oedipus Rex, is about a young man who falls in love with his mother, kills his father, and goes blind. Okay, got a few questions I want you to answer again, and pause if you need to. This time I want you to read the passages on the left side prior to answering questions 3 and 4. Question 5 you may need to go to the internet for. Alright? And this brings us to philosophy. Okay? And there are 3 philosophical giants. Alright? And these 3 giants are Socrates, Plato, and of course Aristotle. And what you will see is, now Socrates, being the first of these 3 giants, questioned everything. And he encouraged his students to question everything. That is, do not accept anything that is given to you. You want to discover it for yourself. Socrates, his method of teaching became known as the Socratic method. All right, and basically what he would do is you ask him a question, he would reply with another question. All right, it seems a little confusing, but what it did is it led you on a road of discovery. Okay, he encouraged people to examine their own beliefs. That is, don't just take what your parents give you. Examine it, test it for yourself, and see if it works for you. Okay, now this line of questioning is going to pose a problem to the leaders of Greek society at that time, and eventually they're going to put him on trial for corrupting the youth of Athens. And he's going to be sentenced to death and have to drink a poisonous hemlock, to which he gladly did. To him, he said there was only one good, knowledge, and one evil, ignorance. Now, his greatest student, and the reason that we know about Socrates today, because he didn't write any books, was because his student, Plato, who wrote The Republic, he wrote about Socrates, okay, and he wrote about this idea of a perfect government. In this idea of a perfect government, one of the things that he put forward was that not all men are equal. That is, some men are fit to be farmers, some men are fit to be warriors, and only a few are fit to rule. And the most wisest among that ruling group should be what he called the philosopher king. Now, he put out these ideas at the school that he founded called the Academy. And one of his pupils at the Academy went on to become great as well. And that is Aristotle. Now, Aristotle is probably the greatest teacher of them all. He came up with the scientific method, or at least the original idea of the scientific method, observation, hypothesis, and experimentation. And later on, they're going to be expanded on, but this was the basics of that idea. Now, Aristotle studied everything: science, botany, zoology, everything, the planets, people, animals, everything. And he wrote about it in these endless number of books. In these books, he's going to develop the rules of logic, the scientific method, and then at his own school, the Lyceum, he is going to train and tutor one young man who will become that philosopher king, Alexander the Great. And Alexander is going to take these teachings and Greek culture and spread it all over Southwest Asia and North Africa. But we'll get to that a little bit later. Right now, I want you to answer these few questions. Okay? And number 8, take a particularly look at number 8. It says, write one quote that sums up your philosophical approach to life. I don't want you to copy somebody else's. Give me your philosophical approach to life. And please go beyond YOLO. All right? The golden age of Greece. That's going to bring us to an end. Sometimes this is called the age of Pericles. And he was able to do what he wanted, which was make Athens the envy of the world. But by doing so, he's also going to make quite a few enemies. And one huge enemy in particular is going to be Athens' old enemy, Sparta. And we're going to get into this tomorrow because this is going to lead to something we call the Peloponnesian War. All right, other people who contributed to this: William Lloyd, Stephen White, and of course my girls, Yasmin and Camille. All right, thank you.